The way our source opens, it just paints this incredibly vivid but tragic picture. You think of Pahalgam Valley, usually so peaceful,
Or
beautiful.
real balm, like you said.
Exactly. And then April 22nd hits, and that piece is just shattered. The source uses this phrase, the cry of Pahalgam. It talks about the shadow of terror stretching over Hindustan. It really grabs you immediately, doesn't it?
It does. And what hits hard right away is how deliberate this attack seems to have been. The source material is pretty clear. The violence in Bison Valley, Bait Ab Valley as it's also known, um, it wasn't random.
No, not at all.
The victims, it says, were singled out, targeted specifically for being Hindustani. That element, that selection,
Yeah.
it points to something much deeper than just
Yes.
random violence.
Right, it wasn't indiscriminate in that sense, even if the firing was. So for this deep dive, that's what we want to get into. We need to really understand the sequence of events, nail down who the sources say is responsible, and then look at the reactions, the ripple effects.
hmm The goal here is really to pull out those key pieces of information, those critical nuggets from the material we have, to give you the clearest possible picture of the event and what it might mean going forward.
Okay, so let's walk through that day. April 22nd, the source puts in around, 2:45 p.m.?
Yeah, about then. And it describes 5 attackers, terrorists disguised in local clothes, armed, basically setting up an ambush in Bison Valley.
And the method was just opening fire, wasn't it? Indiscriminate firing into the tourists there.
Indiscriminate firing, yes, but the source does stress that initial chilling report about selecting victims based on their religion. It just underlines the hateful ideology behind it all.
It's horrific. And the numbers, just devastating. 26 tourists killed.
25 Indians and 1 person from Nepal. And that's just the fatalities. The source makes it clear many others were injured: children, women, elderly people, just caught in it.
It's awful to even think about. And compounding the tragedy, the source mentions the location is quite remote, right? So help getting there. It was delayed.
Yeah, that delay, you can only imagine. It adds another layer of horror, doesn't it? Increased suffering, fear, while waiting for assistance.
And it raises questions, too.
Definitely. Our source doesn't explicitly state it, but you read about that delay, and it makes you wonder about security, about emergency response in these beautiful but somewhat isolated tourist spots. It probably made the whole tragedy worse.
So, responsibility. Who claimed it? The source says initially it was a group called the Resistance Front, TRF.
That's right, TRF claimed it. And the material we're looking at identifies them as basically a front group for Lashkar-e-Taiba.
Which is a major connection. Lashkar-e-Taiba. That's a Pakistan-based group, well known, unfortunately, for attacks in the region. They often use these different names, right, to sort of muddy the waters.
Exactly. But what's interesting here, as the source points out, is that TRF apparently retracted that claim later on.
Oh, they took it back.
Yeah. But despite the retraction, the investigation, based on the details in our source, seems to point very strongly toward Pakistani terrorists being involved anyway.
And specific names have come up.
The source mentions Hashim Musa, Ali Hai, Abdul Toker. These individuals are apparently suspects. And then there's the alleged mastermind, Hafiz Saeed.
Hafiz Saeed. That name is obviously very significant in this context. The source also says sketches of the attackers were released and a reward offered.
Yes, sketches went out, and a pretty substantial reward, up to 2 million rupees for information leading to their capture.
But there's a kind of frustration hinted at in the source material, isn't there? Like, how long will it just be about issuing sketches? It suggests a need for more decisive action.
That's a really sharp point the source raises. Identifying suspects is one thing, a necessary step, for sure, but it doesn't solve the bigger problem, right? Preventing future attacks, dismantling the networks behind them. The source sort of implicitly asks us to think about those systemic challenges.
Okay, so turning to India's response. The source says it was swift. The prime minister cut short an overseas trip.
Yeah, returned early. And an emergency meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Security, the CCS, was called straight away. This speed is definitely emphasized.
And it wasn't just security meetings, right? There were diplomatic moves, too.
Oh, absolutely. Significant ones, according to the source. Things like reducing the number of Pakistani diplomats allowed in India down to 30, canceling visas, sealing the Wagah border crossing.
Wow, okay. Sealing the border? That's major.
It is. And maybe the biggest potential move mentioned in our source is the reported suspension, or possible suspension, of the Indus Water Treaty.
The Indus Water Treaty, suspending that would be huge. It's been in place for decades, governs water sharing. That's a massive strategic lever to even consider pulling.
Exactly. It signals a really significant potential shift in strategy and diplomacy, something with potentially far-reaching consequences, as the source leads us to consider.
And these actions, they weren't just diplomatic paperwork, were they? The source mentions military dimensions, too.
hmm Reports of stepped-up naval exercises out at sea, increased troop deployments along the border, a general strengthening of posture.
And the language changed, too.
Very much so, it seems. The source indicates a hardening of rhetoric, growing calls to label Pakistan directly as a terrorist state. It suggests a shift away from maybe more cautious language used in the past.
So, putting it all together, the diplomatic squeeze, the military signals, the talk of suspending the water treaty, the tougher language, it feels like a real departure, doesn't it?
It certainly does, based on the source material. It suggests India might be moving away from what some might have seen as a policy of restraint or patience, perhaps. Suspending the treaty especially, that's not a minor step. It carries huge implications, strategically, economically.
So what might come next? What kind of strategies are being discussed? Our source touches on what defense experts are saying.
It does. It mentions possibilities that are quite forceful. Things like cross-border operations, maybe surgical strikes, even the use of drone attacks. These are serious military options being floated, according to the experts cited.
Alongside the military options, is there still a diplomatic track?
Oh yes, definitely. The source highlights that India is reportedly making a strong push internationally, sharing evidence, trying to rally global condemnation against Pakistan for its alleged role. That diplomatic effort is presented as a key part of the overall strategy.
So it's a multi-pronged approach being considered. But the underlying feeling coming through the source material is that maybe the old ways, the policy of patience, as it's called, might be over.
That's the strong impression you get. There's a sense that a more decisive, perhaps more assertive path is being seriously considered now.
Which, of course, brings its own set of questions and potential risks, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The source implicitly prompts that thought. What are the potential consequences of these more assertive options versus the perceived limitations of past approaches? It's a complex calculation.
Let's shift focus back to the ground, to the Kashmir Valley itself. After an attack like this, the source describes the atmosphere.
Yeah, understandably, it talks about fear, anger. People deeply worried about this happening again. You can imagine the unease that settles over a place after such brutality.
Absolutely. But it wasn't just fear and anger, was it? The source also highlights something else.
Yes, and this is really important. Amidst all that, the source makes a point of showing these incredible examples of solidarity. Local people guides, pony owners, young Kashmiri Muslims stepping up immediately to help the injured tourists.
That's powerful.
It really is. It's presented as this clear demonstration that terrorism doesn't have a religion, that humanity shines through even in the darkest times. These acts of courage, of compassion, they offer such a vital counter-narrative to division.
It really does. It speaks volumes about the resilience there, despite everything, and the desire to just end this violence. The source conveys this call to get rid of terrorism at its roots, right?
Exactly. That sense of resilience, that determination to overcome the tragedy and build a future free from this kind of violence, it comes through strongly in the material, addressing the root causes, not just the symptoms.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, thinking about everything we've pulled from the source, what's the final takeaway?
I think the core message, the one the source really drives home, is that this wasn't just an attack on Pahalgam or on those tourists. It was aimed at something bigger.
At the spirit of India itself.
Precisely. That's how the source frames it. And the concluding thought it leaves us with is one of unity and strength.
Yeah, that as long as people stand together, that resolve, it can't be broken by terror.
That no terrorist group, no matter how brutal, can ultimately crush that collective spirit. The source kind of reminds us of this inherent resilience, this strength in the nation's fabric.
It's a powerful note to end on. That resilience, that unity. It's the ultimate defense, isn't it?